Do you remember the top 3 meals you've ever had in your life? What you ate, where you were, who you were with? Anyone who listens to this channel regularly might know that I'm a coffee freak. It may or may not surprise you, dear listener, that I actually remember the best cups of coffee I've ever had in my life. I remember where I was, the faces of the people who introduced it to me, and even the dates in some cases. In no particular order, Exhibit A is the best cup of French press I've ever tasted. I'd been visiting family in South Carolina with my grandmother to attend a cousin's wedding. Another of my cousins, his sister, the sister of the guy getting married, was making breakfast the morning of the wedding day and was brewing coffee in a particular way I'd never seen before. I asked what that was. She explained that it was a French press and asked if I'd like to have some. I said sure. Basically, a French press is you take grinds of coffee and you steep them in water as if the same way that you would make a cup of tea, for instance. You leave the beans in the water to steep for a certain amount of time, and then you press them down so that they don't get contaminated with the water. You pour it out, and basically it's coffee via tea. Little did I know, though, that that would be the best of American-style coffee I'd ever had. Or ever would have, probably. I don't know. Up until this point in my life, I still remember how good it tasted. Although since that morning, I refused to drink coffee out of an American-style coffee machine, like Mr. Coffee. I either drink French press now, or I use a manual drip method that you could look up on YouTube. I've been chasing the dragon of that one cup ever since. Incidentally, another of my cousins in that family during that trip had changed the course of my life by reminding me that I wanted to make video games since I was a kid. She asked, "Are you still making video games? Are you planning to?" And I said, "Wait a second, yeah, I did kind of want to do that, didn't I? I forgot." And a few years later, I was making video games. So thanks to that cup of coffee, it kind of changed my life. The best cappuccino I ever tasted came from, and still comes from, a cafe in Edgewater, New Jersey called Cuppy Coffee. Located next to one of my favorite haunts, Mitsuwa, a Japanese marketplace that's famous in the area. I'd spent many beautiful mornings and afternoons working on my comics and scripts at Cuppy Coffee, always with the same cappuccino. A cappuccino is highly concentrated espresso dark roast coffee that's finely ground, and an espresso machine, not an X, uses this highly concentrated, high-temperature water to create what you would consider a shot of espresso or a double shot, and then you would pour carefully frothing milk on top of it, creating half froth and a very concentrated sort of chocolate milk out of coffee. And of course, a cappuccino, if anyone doesn't know, is delicious. But in this particular place, Cuppy Coffee, it's beyond excellent. I could swear they put drugs in it because I have no idea how they make the flavor so fragrant and beautiful. If you're ever visiting North Jersey, I insist you visit Cuppy Coffee. Next is the mighty, famous Greek Frappe. I've had this incredible drink many times, but the best has to be after I took a trip to Boston one year. I'd come home after an exhausting bus ride with some new friends. I was the new guy in the group of people who I barely knew. I was trying to be social and hanging out with a bunch of Greek people my age, trying to make new friends. The bus dropped me off in Astoria, Queens, which is a district of New York City where there used to be a lot of Greeks, not so much these days. I always feel intense nostalgia when I visit Astoria, for reasons I'll have to get into another day. I got off the bus carrying a giant bag, wondering how I'd make it home to New Jersey. While I waited for a ride to pick me up, I spent an hour or so at a cafe and ordered what became my favorite instance of my favorite drink. Perhaps while a ton of memories and worries about the future all swirled in my head. I had time to sit in one of my favorite cities with some of my favorite memories, thinking about all these things. That was another day when my life changed over a cup of coffee. And a Greek frappe, if anyone's wondering, is Nescafe instant dried coffee, which you pour a little bit of boiling hot water and tons of sugar. You mix it like crazy until it creates a froth, and then you add cold water and ice to your taste, possibly milk, depending on your taste. I like it with milk, actually. As I stand here reading this script and drinking from my homemade cold brew, there are more stories about coffee that I could tell you, ideally while listening to a background song called The Fragrance of Dark Coffee from Phoenix Wright. There was one more instance, Vietnamese coffee, from Whole Foods in Bergen Town Center in Paramus, New Jersey, formerly known as the Bergen Mall. You can buy it now in the precise spot where there used to be a pharmacy, I think, which I stared at for hours when I used to visit with my family. There was one instance when I was with my great uncle, who once played a prank on me when I was a kid. I was sitting at the Wendy's at the old Bergen Mall, next to a restaurant called Oriental Grill, where I used to get noodles with carrots and Hunan sauce and various meat. They would grill it right in front of you and ding a bell whenever you left them a tip. Anyway, my great uncle had left me sitting at that table at Wendy's as I ate my square hamburger. After 10 minutes of leaving me there, I got up, and even though he told me to stay there, I ended up finding him waiting right around the corner, leaning against a wall, eating an ice cream cone. It turns out he had been testing me to see how long I would wait alone, how long I would follow instructions. At that exact place, with a completely rebuilt mall, is where I tasted Vietnamese coffee for the first time, and it was pretty darn good. But why am I telling you all this? I theorize that the more senses and emotions that are involved in a memory, the more vivid it is. That's why association is the key to memorization, and engaging the senses is one of the keys to telling a good story. Before I introduce you to one of the people I learned these techniques from, let me ask you one more question. Do you remember the top 3 laughs you've ever had in your life? Mine would definitely be the first time I heard Mitch Hedberg. That whole half-hour special, my mind was blown the whole time. Another would be the time I was standing in my living room, my old living room, when I was reading a certain green text story from a certain website involving certain subjects I'm not sure I can recount at this time. But the reaction JPEGs in that thread were so funny, I temporarily lost my vision and found myself crying on the floor afterwards from laughter. Yet another instance would be Red Letter Media's many hilarious videos and stumbling across something called the Osteoporosis Dance. If you enjoy dark humor, I encourage you to look it up, but don't simply watch a clip of it. You have to watch the whole episode. Now, one of the best laughs I've ever had in my life is thanks to a man named Scott Kurtz, today's guest, as you may have inferred from the title of this video. 10 years ago, I had been taking my daily walk to work from a bus stop. During those walks, I had plenty of time to think about my life, where I'd been, where I was, and where I wanted to go. I was in my early 20s. Although I was a failed artist, a college dropout, I knew 2 things. I was decent at drawing, and I loved comics. I had been struggling to entertain my friends and family, and the entire internet, if they ever would find my comic strip. That was the biggest problem. It was called Bite Size. I'd been trying to publish it for years, but nobody seemed to be biting. I was walking a rabbit trail behind the local library, taking the long way to work because I didn't want to be there, while listening to a podcast called Webcomics Weekly. This is a podcast involving a group of 4 webcomics guys who would sit together and give advice to listeners and crack jokes for about an hour per week. I was a devoted listener. The members of the podcast included Dave Kellett, the creator of the comic strip Sheldon and Drive, and the co-creator of an amazing documentary called Stripped, which I strongly recommend if you like this channel. In case you don't take my recommendation seriously enough, let me tell you, it has the first interview with Bill Watterson. Yes, the Bill Watterson, creator of Calvin and Hobbes, since his retirement. So go hunt down that documentary immediately. Next is Brad Geiger, who was also known by my guest as Brad Wigwam, the creator of Greystone Inn and Evil Inc., who has an extremely distinctive, generous laugh, as you'll hear in a minute. and co-wrote a book I intently studied for years called How to Make Webcomics. Third is Chris Straub, creator of Checkerboard Nightmare, Starslip, and Chainsaw Suit, Broodhollow, the creator of the creepypasta Candle Cove. Chris and my guests have done a ton of amazing comedic work together, which I encourage you to look up. Finally, Scott Kurtz, of course. Before I talk about him, I'd like to play this clip that made me laugh so hard I ended up on the ground in the middle of a sidewalk.
Camera.
I'll write it myself, and we're doing it live.
We're doing it live.
And then you hear that guy in the back. In 3, 2, 1. And now the latest cut from Sting to play us out. Play us out.
Okay.
Good times.
So, guys that's listening live, this is a first for Webcomics Weekly. We're broadcasting the show live as we record it for later posterity.
Woohoo!
How great is that, everybody?
God, it's so incredible what technology lets us do.
Flawlessly.
It's perfect.
But I do have to say, you guys do sound good now. I mean, I was reading my only connection was with the chat, and they were saying that they could hear echoes and they couldn't hear people and stuff like that. Now you guys sound really good. Does it sound good on the stream?
Honestly, I don't care.
Brian,
What do you guys want to talk about today?
we discussed this earlier in the car. Why are you pretending like we didn't have that conversation?
Don't get me laughing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so there's a couple of things I want to talk about. The first one being that there's been a push in digital comics. Digital comics, and by digital comics, I don't mean webcomics. I mean the comic book industry going digital. It seems like the two major players in digital comics are doing their best not to destroy the comic book industry in the process of taking comics digital. But they're gonna anyway. They might as well just give up. No, so the thing I wanted to talk about was, and we haven't done a podcast for quite a bit, so there have been some developments. I'm not going to lie to you. First of all, it was announced a couple weeks ago that Comixology, which is one of the pretty major players in these digital download comic books, announced that they are going to do what's Comixology doing? Comixology is doing, you go to the store and you download a comic at the retailer.
What?
So, yeah.
You have to be physically in the store?
I think either that or through their store. Let me look it up. Maybe I should have it in front of me.
That doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
It kind of takes the mobile out of mobile.
Hold on a second, guys, because this is great. You just don't understand it. Comixology, the leading distributor of digital comics, announced today the industry's first digital storefront affiliate program for retailers. The program will empower comic book merchants to prosper from the sale of digital comics with a Comixology-powered store and reader. Leveraging Comixology's technology will provide retailers the foundation, also maybe a fountain, porcelain fountains, for future digital initiatives as the program evolves. So how will this work? By having a Comixology-powered store and reader integrated with our existing new and back-issue comic website, we will provide our customers with even more access to the comics they love while increasing their loyalty to us, said Chris Powell, General Manager and CRO of Lone Star Comics and MyComicShop.com.
Oh, my God.
Having seen Comixology's retailer tools and pull list services, we trust Comixology's technology to help us thrive in a market where customers are interested in both print and digital comics. So what they're saying is, now, in addition to a publisher or a creator being able to sell digital comics through Comixology, now a store like Lone Star Comics could set up an online store where you buy a digital comic online from your favorite retailer that is a brick and mortar store somewhere, but this is their web store, to then read on your computer and your mobile devices.
So all they've done is added a middleman.
Well, no, Brad. All they've done is added a fourth middleman. Come on, keep up.
Well, yeah, I mean, this doesn't benefit
had
the comics retailer in the slightest.
We already had Comixology, okay?
Right.
Apple, the publisher,
Mm-hmm.
and a creator.
Right.
To split this $1.99 up with.
And so now we're going to add a comics retailer so I can feel good about supporting my comic shop when I buy this comic.
But wait, because Comixology's competitor iVerse is taking it one step further by announcing today that they have partnered with Diamond Comics. You know, those guys shoving comics right down the crapper hole as quickly as they can. Those innovators.
But wait, then maybe it's redemptive. What are they doing?
Okay.
They
Let's
have
not prejudge.
announced Diamond Digital. Brad, Chris, imagine a future where readers and fans can visit their local comic shop to buy not just physical copies of new comics, but also a digital edition that weren't available anywhere else and can be viewed on multiple platforms, including the iPhone, iPad, the web, and others. Well, that future is here. As Diamond Comic Distributors, the world's largest distributor of English, God damn it, of English language comic books, graphic novels, and related pop culture merchandise, joins forces with iVerse Media, the pioneer of not getting my app right, to empower 2,700 brick and mortar comic shops to add a fifth middleman to this bullshit equation.
Yeah, but Scott, you get this thing delivered straight to your cyber zone. No problem. No questions asked.
Thanks to a simple but technologically robust code redemption system.
What the hell is happening? Ah! Kick him.
I can't breathe.
You're getting him out.
Drive to the office and save me. I can't.
God, kick him out. Kick him off. Are we back?
Oh my God, thank God that was being recorded. Oh Christ. Oh Christ. This is it. This is where I die. You were a good friend, Chris. Tell my wife I loved her. Give my dogs a good home. Oh shit. Oh God. That could not have broke on a more appropriate spot.
How did that happen?
Oh shit. Sky blocked up mid-laugh. Did you not hear it?
I heard the whole thing. That's why I was like, cut him off.
I could not see it. I could not use a mouse. Oh shit. Oh my God. We've killed people. I know we've killed people.
That is awesome.
Oh shit. Oh God. All right. I'm gonna try to bring Brad back in. Oh shit.
It's like Skype said, I can do this shit. Hang on a second. No. It's on Brad's end.
It's a fucking grandfather! What's happening? What the fuck is happening?
You know what it is? You know what it is?
He's exploded into a fucking laugh singularity.
Yeah, he's just this beam of energy.
He's the fucking master control program.
You know what happened was something's wrong with his Skype, and that drumming sound, that heartbeat sound, was him probably drumming his fingers, and his Skype just grabbed that and looped it.
Oh fuck.
And now it did it again, but
Here we go. No, Brad.
well, thanks for listening.
Oh Jesus, Brad. Are you kidding? You've created the greatest moment in Webcomics Weekly ever.
To restart again or what?
Oh man. If you missed that, I was crying the whole time. Oh. Now that clip was from, it says 2011. It feels earlier than that. But anyway, it wasn't even intentional, but I would say I owe one of the biggest laughs of my life to Scott Kurtz. Brad Geiger, the guy laughing, his technical snafu was funny, and Chris Straub was more interested in the technical problems. It was Scott's reaction when I heard him profess that he was laughing so hard he was dying, that this is it. He was sure that he killed some listeners. I was walking on a sidewalk and bent over crying from laughter. People were laughing, or they were looking at me. I was so embarrassed, but I could not stop laughing for 10 minutes. So, Kurtz, as you'll hear in this interview, and you guys are going to hear me clearing my throat, this is real. I was just crying from laughter. It's been 10 years. I've listened to it 100 times. It's still funny. All right. So Kurtz is, I would say, an instinctual comedian. He's a goofball, obviously, and he's a natural storyteller. He's also a veteran comics artist whose work I followed for years. I gotta finish this monologue soon. I'm sorry. I promise we'll get to his art soon. This is my longest interview for a reason, after all. I highly recommend bookmarking it now, because this introduction is probably like 15-20 minutes, and the interview itself is 2 hours. You'll probably need to take breaks, but if Joe Rogan can be the most popular podcast ever, I feel like if you're interested in this, which how can you not be at this point, you'll want to listen to the whole thing. But I do want to make one last very important point. The connection between laughter and crying in the human brain. Like, obviously I've been crying just now. So why are these two things that are obviously one's happy, one's sad, why are they so closely linked neurologically? I'm sure you've seen those masks before of comedy and drama, like Shakespeare. You got the laughing face and the sad face, right? Two sides of the same coin. Now, it's my professional belief that in order to tell a good story, you have to inject it with tons of emotion, perhaps even too much sometimes. Like earlier when I told you those stories about my favorite cups of coffee, maybe you could have tasted in your memory your favorite cups of coffee. It helps in a story, when telling a story, to engage the audience's senses, sight, touch, smell, and so on. Whether telling a joke or a story, a good storyteller must be able to observe the world around them acutely in order to paint pictures for the listener's imagination. Now, this is either by nature or nurture. Storytellers have extremely sensitive antennae through which they experience their lives. Imagine someone with a stethoscope in their ears at all times, or binoculars. When a storyteller pays attention to something, they do it very, very hard. When they feel something, they feel it very, very hard. Their memories are landscapes filled with towering vistas and painful thorns. These intimate observers of the world are men and women blessed and cursed with incredible tools to see to the heart of almost anything. That enables them to tell great stories that anyone can relate to. On the flip side, when those scalpels and probes are turned on themselves, it can go really bad really fast. It may not surprise you that Scott Kurtz then can effortlessly tell some of the funniest jokes and some of the most touching stories. Listen to his latest appearances at Penny Arcade Expo, PAX, called An Evening with Scott, as he talks about taking care of his elderly father, struggling with multiple strokes, for example. These stories are both heartbreaking and hilarious. Maybe they're not so different. One night, Kurtz had popped into a certain live stream where I was participating in a drawing contest. I think Scott was trolling one of the hosts following a beef that had nothing to do with me. "Is that the Scott Kurtz?" I interjected, putting my pen down. The very same artist whose career I had followed for almost 2 decades, to whom I owe one of the greatest laughs of my life. Fast forward, yada yada yada, here we are. Thanks to an internet argument that had nothing to do with me, I got to meet one of the most influential creators of my career. If that doesn't sum up the past 2 years of my life, I'm not sure what does. I'm lucky to be here, and I'm lucky to get to talk to all these amazing people. Kurtz is the man, and I can't express how cool it was to talk to him. He'll tell stories, for example, about how he felt when he was among other cartoonists in the newspaper industry, and he wanted nothing more than to be one of their peers. That's how I felt talking to him. I hope I didn't geek out too hard during this conversation, but I'm not really ashamed of it. Perhaps some poor kid will read my comic someday and invite me to his podcast in 10 or 20 years, and I'll be like, nah, I'm just human. And the circle of life will continue. Until then, please enjoy this interview with the legendary Scott Kurtz. For anyone who is listening who doesn't know who you are, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, my name is Scott Kurtz. I am a cartoonist. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I live in a suburb northeast of Seattle, Washington. Mm-hmm. And I've been drawing a daily comic strip called PvP since 1998. And I, about 6 years ago, started another comic called Table Titan. But for the most part, I'm kind of the online version of a syndicated cartoonist. Mm-hmm. I've been doing the same comic strip now for a couple decades.
You mentioned syndicated cartoonist. You've won Eisner and Harvey Awards.
I have won Eisner and Harvey Awards.
I don't want to get things out of order, but I mean, I'm sure that was a massive achievement for you. Well, okay.
It was.
So, yeah, I'm sorry.
It was. The Eisner was surreal, and also a little. I was actually nominated for the Eisner twice, and the year I was nominated and lost means more to me than the year I was nominated and won.
How so?
Because the year I was nominated and lost, I was nominated for Best Humor Comic. Mm-hmm. The year I won, I was nominated for Best Webcomic.
Oh.
Yeah.
So who are you up against those years? Do you remember?
Well, for Humor Comic, I was up against Kyle Baker, who was doing a Plastic Man comic at the time. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there was really much hope of winning that because, Kyle is pretty well known in Plastic Man is pretty well known. He was doing that comic for DC, and I think a lot of times the voting when it comes to the Eisners and stuff, since you're voted on by your peers, it all comes down to what everyone's familiar with and what they've read.
Mm-hmm.
And the odds of a bunch of comic pros having read, a DC humor comic from a humor cartoonist they're aware of, as opposed to an independent humor comic from a cartoonist they've never heard of, was, but I was up there. I was up there with the people that I admired growing up in the comics field, as a book in that industry. The webcomic Eisner happened. It's really interesting. So at first, the webcomic Eisner Award, I was approached about it when they were putting the category together. The people at the Eisners approached me about it and asked me questions about it, and they were talking about how they didn't want it to apply to comic strips. It had to be long form comics. They had all these things they were debating about how to add web comics to the Eisners, and I said that I didn't want to participate in helping them decide that, because I was against them making a special category for web comics. If you do web comics, you're just doing comics. The web part of it is distribution.
I see.
Right? It's not a genre. It's a form of distribution. So, people do web comics. Some people do gag a day strips like I do. Well, there's already a category for that. It's humor. And then some people do superhero stuff. There's a category for that. Some people do westerns. There's, I told them that I felt that the web comics category was like a kid's table they set up at Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to promote that. I didn't want to help them promote that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the only way to be nominated for a webcomic Eisner was to submit it yourself. And all of a sudden, the nominations came out in 2006, and everyone's like, oh, Mr. Outspoken Scott Kurtz, who's against a webcomic category, he's nominated for a webcomic Eisner, so I guess it's okay for him to submit his name, but we're not supposed to. And I was like, I didn't submit my name. I don't know how this happened. So I called Jackie Estrada, who runs the Eisners, and I'm like, I don't understand. I did not submit myself for the Eisner. And she said, yeah, the judges were looking at the categories, and someone said, why isn't PvP in here? And I think it was only the second year it had been awarded. And Jackie said, well, Scott doesn't agree with the category. He won't submit his name. And they said, well, we'll submit it for him. And then I won it. So I don't know. I was kind of...
I understand. So the achievement was sort of, I won't say robbed exactly, but it was...
It's not that it was robbed. I mean, and now that I'm older, I feel differently about it. But at the time, it's like, I wanted to be seen for the work I was making. I didn't want to be seen for... I didn't want a pat on the back for having found a new way to get my comic out there. Yeah. I wanted a pat on the back for making a great comic. And all anyone ever wanted to talk about was, wow, you really bucked the system, or wow, you really have found a lot of success on your own as an independent creator. No one ever wanted to talk to me about the strip or art or the structure of a gag or storytelling. I felt like that was reserved for the artists they respected for their work.
I see.
And here was a whole category dedicated to that, and I didn't like the idea. But
there is, in fairness, I'm looking at my notes for anyone listening. Half of my notes are about exactly that. Like, I want to ask you about art stuff for sure.
Well, I don't mind. It's not so. I'm I'll be 50 next year, so my angry young man phase is kind of over. But
Well, I'm asking as someone who has been following your work. I'm sure I'll say this in the intro later, but like, I have known about you and have been, on and off reading webcomics for maybe 20 something years. And like, your name has been in my head forever. So it's like, if I think of all the guys that have like, how do you put it? I don't know if I don't want it to sound like I'm, kissing your butt or anything, but like when you talk about Jim Davis in your I mean, I've been listening to your podcast forever and stuff like that. You talk about Jim Davis, and of course, there's Watterson and all those guys. And I'm like, oh, Kurtz, he's one of my guys. That I sort of, as I was forming myself in webcomics or comics in general, I won't even say webcomics because I know your position on that. But yeah, I can understand completely that your position was, and I wouldn't be surprised if it still was, this idea of webcomics as a lesser platform to older guys who didn't understand it. I remember that was one of the major themes of Webcomics Weekly, for example. And then there's this idea of you want to be part of the peers, not the guy that kind of got in on a technicality. You want to earn your place, and you have earned your place, but it's almost like there's a club of guys who don't understand what we do. And because they can't understand it, it's like we're just that guy that, okay, we'll let those guys in because I don't know how to word it in a nice way, but like it's as if we didn't earn it, but we may as well let them in just to check that box off.
Yeah, well, that came later. What's interesting is that what's interesting to me is that you're not the first person that's told me that. It's odd to me that I could be anyone's Jim Davis. I've been told you're not the first person that told me that. Like that I'm their guy. For me it was Schultz and Jim Davis, and for this generation, for a lot of this generation, it's me, and that doesn't make any sense to me. And I appreciate it, and I'm flattered by it, but I don't 100% understand how that's possible. Especially since I know that most of PvP is me just kind of winging it and trying to figure it out. But I guess looking back, I don't know if Schultz was ever winging it, but maybe they were winging it too, and it just seemed that way to me. I mean, the thing that's funny to me and kind of ironic is that all I wanted to be when I grew up was a syndicated cartoonist and be a part of that peer group. Mm-hmm. And I made kind of my own peer group, and then I didn't appreciate it because all I wanted was to be accepted by the other one. So I had this peer group willing and eager to be, a part of something I was making. Mm-hmm. I didn't appreciate them as much because I was too busy trying to get the old men and women that I grew up admiring to stop telling me that I was ruining the business. And that's what was hard, was not just that they said, they never said that they didn't think my art was good or that my comic was good. They told me I was ruining things for them.
Were they saying that tongue-in-cheek, or did they... I mean, people can say that and mean it with a smile on their face.
No, they meant it. So, because you have to understand that for syndicated cartoonists, they're paid by newspapers a fixed amount per strip. They literally earn a dollar amount for every daily. Their Sundays are sold separately because newspapers view their Sunday edition as almost a different company. Mm-hmm. But the size of comics were shrinking every year, and the amount of money they were paid per comic was shrinking every year. And so when they would get together and say, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix the industry? Their discussions were centered around how can we get newspapers to pay more for our strips?
Yeah. And
they felt that by me and others giving away content like this for free, that we were devaluing their
Oh,
stuff.
okay.
Why would a newspaper pay for something that's being given away for free?
I see.
And so they just didn't want to talk to me. I was the enemy. So when I showed up and said, "Look, guys, I did it. I made a career out of making comics. I get to be in the National Cartoon Society now, right?" They were like, "No, you're ruining it. You're ruining it for all of us. We don't like you. You don't get to be a part of it." And that didn't last the whole time. They eventually kind of figured out that we weren't the problem, but there was bad blood. And then, of course, I was so upset I was like, okay, well, if I can't be a part of this club, I'll burn it to the ground. That was my attitude. And then all I did was burn every bridge that led me to that peer group. So I just acted a fool, really, for a while.
What years would this have been? Early 2000s or mid, late?
Yeah, early 2000s, because one of the things I did when they wouldn't let me in the NCS, I actually had a San Diego announced that any newspaper that wanted my comic strip for free could just get it for free. And that was, I didn't really want to do it. I didn't want to deal with it because I know that if you understand how newspaper editors work, and kind of how the newsroom works, it used to be in the 80s and 90s and before, there was a dedicated editor for the comics page. It was a features editor, and they were the person that bought the comics from the syndicates. They had good relationships with all the salesmen there, and they basically curated your newspaper comics page. And then that stopped being the case. The newspapers just kind of stopped caring about the comics page, mostly because newspapers went from being owned by individual companies to being owned by conglomerates. So comic strips used to be very sought after because if a syndicate would sell you peanuts, you might be able to say, "I'll buy peanuts for you. I'll buy peanuts from you, but you don't get to sell it to my competing paper." Because then we'll be the paper with peanuts. And everyone loves Snoopy.
Yeah.
And so you could get into bidding wars. And in fact, some people used to buy comic strips just to not run them, just so the other paper couldn't have them. But then all the newspapers got consolidated. So if you lived in Dallas, and there were 3 different newspapers, Dallas Morning News, the Dallas Times Herald, they weren't competing. They were all owned by the same company. And so there was no competition, and then the person in charge of the comics page was someone who didn't want to do it. And they all probably would want something different, which they did. But I only gave the strip away for free to any newspaper who wanted it, to piss off the National Cartoon Society. Really dumb move on my part.
Well, it's understandable. There's that sort of rock star thinking of the young guy's going to mix up the rules for the older guys. And then a generation goes by, and then more young people come by and mix up the formula again. Unfortunately, I think it was the early to late 2000s when newspapers were really struggling. The internet was really picking up steam, and online monetization was becoming more commonplace. I remember it being very scary for people to even, use Amazon and eBay and stuff for a while.
Oh yeah.
But then
I remember my dad warning me against buying anything online. Yeah. Don't do it. They'll get your credit card.
And in many cases they did and do. I mean, I still have occasionally, have to deal with that kind of stuff, but
Sure.
But it's really, that is one of the things that you are an expert on that I would have loved to ask more about, but there's so many things I want to ask about. It's kind of hard because I have, for anyone listening, I've been listening to so many, I mentioned Webcomics Weekly, for example, and you guys did so much amazing work with that. And I used to listen to that every day as I was walking. I used to have a job at a print shop. and I would listen to every new episode and the archives all the time because I was trying to get my own little webcomic going. And I'd be taking notes, and I'd be like, oh my God, these guys, they know everything. You know, they know the whole history of comics and everything, right? And especially strips. But, all right, so the older guys, I think I remember seeing in a documentary that Stephen Pastis was saying that he's the youngest guy in that pantheon, or that section of comics. But, okay, so for the younger...
He kind of is, yeah. Kind of is, yeah.
And... Well, for us, for our circle, let's say, we know that newspapers are just another way to publish comics, so I agree with this.
Yes, and if newspapers were a really great source of revenue distribution, I would be submitting PvP for newspapers immediately.
Yeah.
I'm not against newspapers at all.
No, because it's the comic, it's the art form that you're most passionate about.
Yeah. At this point.
That would lead to one of the questions of going back to your biography. Obviously we cheated with Garfield and all that sort of thing. What made you passionate about the art form in the first place, and what made you pursue it, first as a hobby and then as a profession?
You know, I don't really know why I was attracted to this aesthetic. There was something about the economy of line and the bold inking and spot blacks of a comic strip that just really appealed to me. I mean, I think all kids are attracted to comics, cartoons, and stuff, obviously. Mm-hmm. But you know, there was something about the stylization of comic strips that really grabbed my attention. There was a comic strip called Tiger. Let me see if I can find out who wrote Tiger. I'm forgetting it now. It was written by Bud Blake. And he was born in 1918, Bud Blake. But Tiger was you know, another strip about kids. But his was the first strip I'd really tried to emulate. It was crazy to me how unique and powerful his panels were, because he really could simplify expression and figures, and he seemed to have a very confident line, but a very simplified, stylized line, and he had these really bold spot blacks everywhere that really anchored every panel. Mm-hmm. And
I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, when I saw that, I was like, "Oh my God, this is crazy." Mm-hmm. And then that's when I really first started thinking about it as an aesthetic. I think my attraction to making comic strips was Garfield. My mom bought me the very first Garfield book, Garfield at Large, and the first Garfield strip says, "My name's John Arbuckle. I'm a cartoonist. This is my cat Garfield." And that was the first time I understood there was a job you could have, like my dad had a job, but you made comic strips. And so I was like, oh, well, that's what I want to do. I didn't know that could be a job.
So you had already been reading them and in love with them, and then it clicked that it's a job.
Yeah, I mean, I had read the comic pages. I was fascinated with the aesthetic. My dad is a German immigrant, and my grandmother would send me comics from Germany, so I got all of the BDs before I even knew what a Euro comic was. I got Asterix, and I got the original Smurf comics by Peyo, and
Tintin?
I don't know that I ever got Tintin. I got a bunch of other stuff. I'd have to look it up. I might have even gotten Moomin. But my grandmother would just send us comics, you know, but the comics that she would find in Germany were all European comics. You know, she didn't send me fantastic. Oh, I actually did get a couple Spider-Man comics in German called Die Spinne, which means the spider. But so I was exposed pretty early on to the Euro style
Longer form
comics.
stories.
Yeah, and that aesthetic. And we would also get toys from Germany, and the toys were covered in that kind of Euro style art too.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of character design. So yeah, so like the way that a horse was drawn in like a Lucky Luke comic blew me away. That it could be a cartoon, clearly a cartoon horse, but still be a horse. Like that, it looked so much like a horse, but had my aesthetic that I loved. So yeah, I mean, I was in the 4th grade, and I remember going to school and telling my teacher, Mrs. Swallow, like, I'm going to be a cartoonist. I discovered this is a job. My uncle worked at a college. He worked at Cabrillo College in California. He was a guidance counselor. He was a career counselor. Mm-hmm. And I called him up and I said, do you have any information on how to be a cartoonist? And he's like, oh, I don't know, Scotty. You know, that's not a very common job. And then he called me up and said, I actually do. I have something from a syndicate. I'll send it to you. And it was, he had little pamphlets. Like if you wanted to learn how to be an accountant, he would give you a pamphlet, and the college had gotten some information from some accounting firm on what it means to be an accountant. He had a whole thing from Universal Press, and it was all about Jim Davis. I flipped my lid. Flipped it. And there was a picture, and keep in mind, this is a Xerox of the original pamphlet they sent that is a photograph of his desk. And I went to the art store. My mom brought me to the art store, and I put the pamphlet down, and I said, what's on this desk?
What's that triangle?
Yeah. And he's like, well, that, exactly. I bought a triangle. I bought a T-square. He gave me a crow quill pen. He asked me what nib. I didn't know.
Oh, man.
Like I came home with a little, he was like, oh, and my mom was just so eager to spend the money. She's like, whatever he wants, he's going to be a cartoonist. And this guy was like, saw us coming from a mile away.
Oh, man.
But I went home with a little art wooden briefcase full of cartooning tools and Bristol board. Like I had what you needed to be a real cartoonist. And then my mom signed me up for a cartooning class at like the local YMCA or something. And I showed up with this, and the teacher's like, whoa. What is this weirdo kid?
That reminds me of, it's sort of like, I joke that comics is like a religion to some people, including myself, where it's like, no, I actually have been doing this since I could hold a piece of paper and a pencil. Like, I breathe comics, so it's really funny to hear the origin stories.
I remember being there, and I finally had someone in front of me who was I was an authority, and I could ask questions like, okay, look at this pamphlet. What is the crow quill on the tip of this pen? So I couldn't answer that question.
Yeah.
And there were other people in the class, and one was a kid that wanted to make comics, and one was an older guy, and they had us go up and draw on the whiteboard something to give an example of the work. And I had my own cartoon character, so I went up and I'm like, "This is Zach the Dragon. He's my comic strip character. I'm a cartoonist. This is my comic strip character." And everyone went, "Okay," because I was just some kid drawing a cartoon character, right?
How old?
I don't know. How old are you in the 4th or 5th grade?
I don't know. 10.
However
11.
old that is. 10, 11, yeah.
Okay.
And then this older guy goes up and drew a plant with ice cubes hanging off of it and wrote "ice plant" underneath it. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm in a room of amateurs.
Look at this guy over here.
Look at this guy with ice plant. These guys are going to take up all of the time of this teacher.
Oh my goodness.
And I need to have my questions answered. So yeah, I was very serious about it.
All right, so two questions then that leads me to A, was the teacher able to answer your deepest questions? Like,
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, he was very excited. I remember that he went over how different artists like different crow quill pens, and then he told me that, he never discouraged me, right? Like, he never said, "Well, you should use markers. Crow quill pens are tough to master," you know. He never said any of that. He was like, "Here's how you use the T-square. This is what this is for." And then, blah blah blah, and here's how you set up your panels. Like, he was a good teacher. He didn't try to discourage anyone. So the kid that wanted to make comics, he would say, "Look, I don't really know a lot about comic books, and I can try to help you with this, but it's a very specific thing, and I could get you recommend some books and blah blah blah, and I hope you could still take stuff away from the class. I think you should stick around, but this isn't a comic book class. It's just kind of a cartoon class." Yeah, he understood the tools, and he showed me how to use them. And he was trying to. I remember him teaching me that the reason why the crow quill was shaped that way, with the slit and the hole in the middle, was the hole was the reservoir. It held the ink, and then when you press down, it would split that open, and the ink would go down. And the harder you press, the more they spread, and the thicker the line is. And that you never push up; you always pull down, because it'll make the pen go and splatter the ink.
Yeah.
Like, he taught me all that. So
That's fascinating.
yeah.
So you had an understanding of things like line economy. You were studying that since you were 10, possibly.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. I've been studying that since I was 10, easily. Yeah, and
What-
my dad was really big on that too. My dad would push me to. I would always, you're a kid, so the people that you have to show your comics to are your friends, and they all think it's great. They all think it's amazing, and your parents. And I had my brother as well. But my mom thought everything I did was amazing, whether she understood it or not. She's like, "Oh my God, this comic strip's so funny." And I'm like, "Do you get the joke, Mom? Really? Do you get it?"
Yeah.
And she would say, "No, but I can tell it's funny. It's so obvious that I don't get the joke, but I know that it's funny. I can tell it's funny." And then my dad, I think, felt he needed to counter that. So he would look at me and say, "This hand is wrong," or these lines aren't clean enough. And I'm like, "Yeah, I get it. I have to work on that, but is it funny?" And he's like, "Well, don't worry about that. Focus on what you need to improve."
I see. So they were
And I don't-
focusing. They were
I don't know-
focusing on surface level
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I remember one time, and this was college right now. So now I've done a little bit, and I remember one time my brother and I were sitting around talking, and we're at my kitchen table at my dad's house. We were home for the weekend, and I was doodling, and Brian's like, "That's pretty good. He would be a fun character." And then I was like, "Well, let's do this." And then I drew another version of this character, and Brian's like, "Oh, that's fucking great. Like, you nailed it. That's the most professional thing you've ever done." I'm like, "Dad, check it out." And he's like, "Yeah, it's good, but..." And Brian's like, "No, there's no but. That's perfect." And Dad goes, "Yeah, but I watched him draw it, and he worked too hard. Until he can go wheek, 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 and get the brushstrokes right, he's not a professional."
I see.
And I was like, fucking A. So, yeah, he always never discouraged me from doing it. He was never like, "Don't be a cartoonist. Don't do this. Don't do that." But always was pushing me to improve. So,
Yeah, there's a saying I always think about when it comes to training is that you can't grow without friction. But obviously, when it comes from an authority figure like a father or parent, you want to please them on one hand, and they want to challenge you on the other.
yeah.
You were in college. Did you go for cartooning or for something else?
No, I went to college because my dad had a real big hang-up about college. He was a German immigrant. He went to school, flunked out, wasn't going to graduate. and his dad told him he had to join the army or get a job. So he joined the army, and he figured he was going to be drafted anyway because it was during the Vietnam War. He was stationed in Germany, and he came back and went back to school, and the teachers were like, I don't know that we want to let you back in. This was Cabrillo College, where my uncle was a counselor, and said, yeah, I don't know, Frank, if we should let you back in, because you basically were expelled academically for just goofing off. And then one of his teachers said, nah, he's been in the army. He's changed. He's an officer. And they let him back in, and he got a 2-year degree. He finished his 2-year degree. And he, for his whole life, had a hang-up that he only went to a junior college and got a 2-year degree, and it wasn't good enough. That he should have gotten a 4-year degree, gone to a real university. So my brother and I had it pelted in our heads from birth that we were going to go to a university and get a college degree. There just was no question about it. So I was just not, school is not for me. My head was not in that. I wanted to be a cartoonist. I didn't need to go to college. So I went to school on an art education degree. I figured I could be an art teacher during the school year and work on comic submissions during the summer. And then switch that to commercial art degree because the art education degree had a math requirement and I couldn't do it. But the commercial art degree did not have a math requirement. I'm like, oh, fuck, I'm changing my major. And I went into commercial art, and then I just quit. I was wasting my parents' money. I didn't want to finish. I kind of grew up enough to know I was never going to finish. And so I went home and I said, Dad, I'm dropping out. I don't want to do this, and I'm wasting your money. And so yeah, so I went to about 3 years worth of 2.5 years worth of college, and then quit.
Nice. I dropped out after my first year ended. I have a similar story actually, because I'd realized that all I was going to do was earn a degree, but I could do all the training myself. The only difference would have been networking, I think. And that was bothering me a lot, especially having to take like math classes and stuff. And I was annoyed that I was going for cartooning, but all the animation majors started immediately. And I'm like, wait, am I studying a fake degree or something?
Started what immediately?
They started learning animation immediately from their freshman year.
Yeah. I gotcha. And then the comic majors had to do like basic
foundation
art
stuff. I'm like, what is this crap? Like, I need the boot camp of comics right now.
Yeah.
But that's interesting.
Where did you go to school?
It was the School of Visual Arts in New York City.
See, that's crazy because your generation. How old are you?
I'm 35, so I went in 2003-ish.
So you went to school in 2003, right? So computers were being used for art. No one questioned that. So I graduated high school in '89. When I was in college, our art professors all canceled classes to tell us that they found flyers all over the campus for selling fonts, and if we turned any projects with computer fonts used in them, we'd get an automatic F. That computers would never be used for desktop publishing and for publishing or typography, and that the computer department was a joke.
Sorry, you said this was 90?
Back 1989.
89.
Yeah, 1989, 1990.
Jeez.
Yeah, so I graduated 89. Yeah, and they were like, no fonts, no computers.
Man.
The second floor is
we went to school, especially you. Between newspapers collapsing and schools changing to digital, wrong place, wrong time.
But also, there weren't any schools offering sequential art degrees or comic degrees. I'm sure that Cal Arts existed in '89. You could go get an animation degree there, but that was crazy. The concept of that was like crazy. Mm-hmm. But like Savannah College of Art and Design, none of that. Like, I was married for a year, and then I got this email or a pamphlet about the Savannah College of Art and Design and a sequential art degree, and I was so pissed that that they had, like sent it to me. Like, it's too late. I can't go back to school now. But what's funny is now, having met and spoken at SCAD, I'm so glad I didn't go to SCAD. What a waste of money that would have been.
You mentioned the move to digital. Of course, I know ever since I discovered you, you had been doing digital, obviously. When did you make the move to, say, tablets and all that stuff, Photoshop? Did you train yourself?
Yeah, 2007 is when I switched.
Okay.
So up until then, I was doing it by hand. Krahulik at Penny Arcade was working digitally on a tablet.
Oh, so you were scanning and coloring.
I was scanning it in, yeah. I wasn't coloring yet. I was
Nice.
scanning it in, and
Wow.
I would draw the strip on Bristol, mostly just the characters. Sometimes I would draw the characters once or twice, and if I was going to repeat them, I wouldn't draw them. So I have a lot of original art of strips that's like a fully cut out strip with 4 panels, and there's no dialogue, no spot blacks, not a character in every single panel. So if it's Francis and Cole talking for 4 panels, and I know I'm not changing Francis at all, there's only Francis once on the original art, because I would just copy and paste them once I scanned it in.
I see.
So I have all this original art that's just complete shit, because all of the work was done inside. Yeah, and now that I look back at almost 2 decades of digital art, I'm terrified.
Terrified in what sense?
Well, I don't know how to preserve it. How do you archive this? Like, they're Photoshop files. They're fucking Photoshop files. Like, and, so far Adobe hasn't gone out of business, and thank God, but like, they're up in the cloud, which is, I guess, seems more safe. I mean, ostensibly, right, as presented, but like, they used to be on CDs, but CDs don't last forever. And how quickly is media types abandoned? Like, can you imagine if I had the first like 5 years of PvP on like a zip drive? I'd be fucked. I mean, like, I don't know what to do to archive this. My colorist on Table Titan, Steve Hamaker, he colored all of Jeff Smith's Bone. His wife, Jenny, runs the Billy Ireland Cartoon Museum in Columbus.
Oh, get out of here.
Yeah. And they, they have, I've been there, and they have, a special fire-protected room that, with all these things, they have all this original cartoon art. They have most of Watterson's stuff. They have original Jim Davis's and stuff, and you got to put on white gloves to see it. It's fucking amazing.
But
like,
I'll make a pilgrimage there someday. Have to.
You need to. Yeah, you need to go. But Jenny was like, any art you want to send me, send it. We'd love to have it. And I'm like, most of the stuff that I would love to send you, it's a Photoshop file. Like, I don't know what to do. And so I think, if not this year, next year, I want to definitely come up with a plan of maybe like printing it out to Bristol and sending it to Jenny. Because I have a printer that'll print on Bristol, and at least then I have a hard copy of it somewhere that's scannable. Yeah, it terrifies me.
Oh, if printing is something that you're interested in, I actually used to work as a printmaker for like over 5 years.
Well, you bought a really nice printer, right? To make how'd that work out for you?
A handful. Well, I have the one printer, which is a CMYK printer. That's for my bulk work. So say like I'm printing a floppy comic.
Right.
Mass producing. So that's my mass production printer. And then I have what's called I used to call it a Giclée printer, which is 8 to 12 different colors. So it's not just CMYK. It includes green, light magenta, light cyan, light gray, light gray.
Okay.
So basically, you know the differences with the RGB spectrum and CMYK? How? If not,
I
it's
kinda
okay.
do.
No problem.
I don't. I know they're different.
Okay.
I know one's for print and one's for visual light on the computer.
Yeah. All right. In that case, I think you'll be really excited by this then. So RGB, basically, the spectrum is way, way more complex. And you can get way more saturated colors, more vibrant colors. And CMYK is relatively dull. So if you were to preserve the rich colors of anything, especially a digital comic, you're going to want to use like at least an 8-color printer. And I can give you a list of some that are really cheap. So when I print like a poster, for example, I have my really fancy printer that can print really vibrant colors. And it's an inkjet. It's not a laser printer. So the difference is with inkjet is you can get, it's basically a wet media. So it behaves like watercolor or anything like that. It can reproduce any color on the spectrum, basically. So if you were to preserve your works, those are the printers I would recommend. And I can give you a list.
Oh yeah, you need to send that to me.
Yeah, let me write that down.
I would love that.
Yeah.
God, it's going to cost
easy.
me a fortune to do this, isn't it?
No.
20 years of comics?
Well, it depends on the number, but if you want one copy of each, there are printers that can be like workhorses. It depends on the ink cartridges and the richness of the colors.
Yeah, I mean, most of PvP is a lot of PvP is in black and white, so there is that.
It depends. If you save them at really high DPI, you could just print them out on a basic CMYK printer. For almost nothing.
Yeah, I'm not so concerned about the cost of the printer as I am the cost of the ink.
Ink can be expensive, but maybe I'll tell you this offline. I can explain, but if you're just printing one copy of everything, it's not as expensive as you might think. That big of a deal?
Okay.
No.
Cool.
Yeah. No, I'm really glad you mentioned that because I can, like, preservation and history is like the most important thing in a profession like this.
Yeah,
Jeez.
I agree.
Okay. Well, let me not get off track then. I'll make a note for that for later. Let me think. So we talked about digital tools. I know that you at some point switched to a Cintiq. Could you tell me about how that felt compared to previous media?
It was amazing. It was a gift for my 10-year anniversary. I was doing a signing at local comic book shop to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the strip, and my family showed up. My brother, my mom, or my dad, and my stepmom, and my brother made like a 3D cake and stuff, and Angie and my parents all chipped in and bought me a Cintiq, and it was a huge game changer. Like, it was just crazy to be able to draw directly onto the screen. I still do my best work on it. I know a lot of people still love working on tablets. I have a real disconnect where I'm drawing not what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
I don't know. That might just be a me thing.
Well, it's more of a coordination thing. Some people, like with gaming, like let's say they'll look at their hand at the controller as they're playing, and it doesn't click that it's a 1-to-1 ratio on what's happening on the screen. Calibration's a huge problem with those types of tablets, but Cintiq, of course, is a 1-to-1.
Yeah, I really, really love it. And I also, think that as time moves on, it's all going to be drawing on a screen. I mean, drawing on an iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil is one of the most wonderful drawing experiences that I've ever had. It really is crazy how good that works.
Is there a delay? I've never used a Cintiq, actually, and it's a huge investment. But let's say I drag the pen across the screen really fast. Does the cursor have to catch up, or is it immediately? It doesn't.
I mean, if you have, there's there's a ton of factors involved. But if you've got the computer to handle it, and there's things you can do to help that. These days, it shouldn't be an issue. No, it's dead on balls accurate. The problems I've had with that in the past pretty much went away. I think technology kind of caught up with it. Photoshop can be very bloaty and eat a ton of RAM, but like most especially now with like solid state drives and stuff, and the bottlenecks for that kind of went away. I use Clip Studio Paint to make my comics now exclusively, and that is a pretty clean program. Everything in it is made specifically to make comics, and it's not as bloated as Photoshop. And it works really, really great. And it works really great on the iPad too. It's a subscription to own it for the iPad, but the Clip Studio software for the iPad is the full desktop app. It's a full desktop program on the iPad. It's not an iOS version of it. It's the full functioning app on the iPad. It's crazy. I have a hard time drawing on the iPad just because I like to have my drawing surface kind of up in front of me at an angle, almost like an easel.
Okay.
And I'm not super good at sitting there and drawing in my lap. The ergonomics of it don't work out 100% for me.
Well, that's a huge factor. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ergonomics is the most important. Posture, where your hand is. Sometimes you can't even draw.
I just recently bought. I discovered I had repetitive stress in a wrist from. I want my Cintiq as close to my tummy as possible, which means my keyboard for keystrokes are behind the Cintiq. So I have my left hand.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, kind of curled around. But I was watching a video on. I've been watching a lot of videos on how they make comics in Japan, and how the mangaka work. And I've been watching all kinds of videos on mangaka and how they put together their comics and the culture of making comics over there, not just reading it, and how it's different from the way we do it. And I saw this guy drawing in Clip Studio, and he was drawing with his right hand, and he had his left hand in his lap, and he was holding what looked like a Nintendo Wii nunchuck. And he was just going chick, 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 click, 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 switching to pencil, switching to brush, fill.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what the fuck is this? And the people that make Clip Studio make a peripheral called the TabMate. And it's a little thing that you hold in your hand with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 buttons and a scroll wheel. And it works, and I'm sitting here right now drawing as we talk, and I've got it in my lap, and I'm just... I don't have any more repetitive stress.
Oh, good. So you bought one.
I did. It was actually very affordable. I was shocked.
And it's just mapped to certain features.
Yeah, you can map it. Yeah, you can customize it and map it yourself. And it took about a day to build the muscle memory for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thrilled with it. But yeah, no, this I love working with the Cintiq. I love working with digital media. I've ruined myself now for traditional media.
Yeah, it becomes, you get spoiled. There's always that. My left hand always is trying to Control Z, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's a difference between knowing how to draw and workflow. You know, there's just a difference between drawing something and having a workflow for producing finished art. And you know, I could sit and take my time with traditional media, but I'm trying to meet a schedule and I'm trying to maintain a certain pace, and that pace is completely now based on my ability to work digital. So
If you had a student who was trying to learn drawing, would you recommend they start digitally or traditionally?
it doesn't matter. I would probably tell them at this point to work digitally, just because. I mean, at this point, I would imagine that no student's going to come to me that hasn't already done it
That's
in their
true, I
amateur
suppose.
career. And also because, you know, the odds of them having to get a job that isn't just making their own comic strip is high, and someone's going to want them to know how to draw digitally. So
Yeah, it's almost mandatory now.
I would be afraid to tell them not to.
Yeah. What's your...
Both.
I'm sorry?
You got to do both now.
Yeah. It's really difficult to differentiate them. Even with, like, I'm trying to draw some manga now as practice, and I don't use ink anymore at all, because I realized that by the time I scan my art, there are so many modifications I make digitally that it's just a waste of time to do things physically now, because it ends up digital. Yeah, I don't do spot blacks anymore with ink. I always just, in manga they just draw an X, and then, you use a paint bucket tool or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, I'd realized there's so many middlemen steps that I can just cut out by drawing directly into Photoshop. But
yeah, and that's designing a workflow, right? That's an important part of maintaining a schedule.
What's your daily schedule like? As far as do you warm up? What's your...
Well, it's funny. It's funny that you bring that up, because I'm coming out of a really bad spell where my schedule had gone to shit due to circumstances out of my control in my life that just led me to kind of really not be available to work the way that I want to, and I'm just now rebuilding my schedule, especially with this new 3.0 reboot. So I can't claim that I've been doing this for a long time, and it's been this way for 20 years. I've traditionally been a pretty lazy artist and kind of fly by the seat of my pants, and it's led to me missing deadlines and getting behind and all kinds of stuff. But my workflow now, or my schedule now, is that I have certain days of the week that I write and certain days of the week that I draw. I mean, mostly I'm drawing. There's only usually one day a week that I write. And also, this is also in the time of COVID, everything is fucking jacked, right?
Yeah.
Because normally you're not grieving the country's not grieving when you're working, but nothing's normal right now. But so yeah, I like to write on Thursdays. I like to write on Thursdays because if I have a whole week of PvP written, I can knock three or four full strips out in a day. And it feels really good on a Thursday to write a week of PvP and then knock most of it out on a Friday, knowing that Monday I'm good for the weekend. I don't have to worry about what's going to be up Monday morning. And then I also have those. Usually when I go to bed on Friday night, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday's PvP are done. And that PvP is what gives me the most mental stress about what needs to be done, because it's just kind of ingrained in my mind that if PvP isn't posted, my career is falling apart. Like I'm hurting my career. It's PvP Online is where most of my traffic goes to. It's the site I do and the work that I do that gets the most attention. It's the website that's the easiest to get attention to other projects that I do, and I feel compelled to protect it and maintain it and grow it. to the best of my ability. There's only so much you can grow an audience after 22 years. So maintaining it and keeping audience that you have and keeping them interested in what you're doing is important to me. And I feel that the bare minimum I can do is to make sure there's a new strip up every weekday. And if that's not up, or if it's up and it's shit, I feel like, well, here it goes. Here it starts.
Here.
So,
I'm sorry. Here, what goes? A sort of
Here
cooling
comes
of the.
here comes the beginning of when this whole house of cards fall apart, and I have to find a real job.
Oh.
I don't know if it's imposter syndrome. I don't know if every cartoonist goes through this, but some days it feels like, oh, I've got lightning in a bottle here. I get to do what I love for a living, and I just get to keep going indefinitely, and it's wonderful. And then some days it feels like, oh, fuck. This is a house of cards. It's all going to fall down one day. This can't be maintained, and I'll be destitute. I won't have any way to make money. And then, now the stress of that is even worse because I actually was successful for 20 years plus. Mm-hmm. So now I'm 50. And there's really no place for me to go if cartooning doesn't work out. No one's going to hire a 50-year-old fat dude with no skills. What am I going to do?
Well,
and the obvious answer to that is it's just not going to be a problem. There's a ton I can do, and it's not an issue. But it's a vestigial kind of it's just this vestigial part of my anxiety that's been left over that is something that I know exists, and I calm it by just writing on Thursdays and knocking out a week of strip on Friday, so that I know that when I sit down on Monday to work on stuff, I don't have that sort of Damocles over my head of, is there a strip ready to go? Are the strips good? Are people going to like them? I like to start my week that way. Mm-hmm. And then on Monday, I will do something other than PvP. Usually it's Table Titan stuff. And then I'll finish up my week and then get to Thursday where I'm writing again, and that's pretty much it, unless there's a special project or a convention coming up that changes the schedule. I don't do a lot of warm-up sketches. I've never been that guy. I just kind of want to dive into what I'm working on that I'm excited about. I know a lot of people online are like, oh, here's my warm-up sketch today, and here's my cool-down sketch, and I'm like, shut up.
It's because I've had a struggle with this for a long time. Is I don't enjoy just drawing for the sake of drawing. I never have. I need to draw a thing that I've written or has been written. Like it needs to have context, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm the same way. Like I don't just fill up a sketchbook because I love to draw. I have a plan. Like, guys, I have a great idea. This is going to be awesome. I'm making a comic, or I'm going to make a flip book, or I'm going to draw this new comic strip, or I'm creating a new character, or I'm designing a D&D character for my next campaign. Like I get really, or I'm making something for my dad for Christmas, or I'm drawing something for my wife. Like I rarely just sit down with the sketchbook and go, I think I'm going to go to the coffee shop today and just jam, man. Just jam out on the sketchbook.
That's an interesting disciplinary question then, is a lot of comics creators, especially manga creators that I grew up with them, they're both writers and artists. And I've noticed that it's almost like an RPG hybrid class. They don't have the strengths or weaknesses of either just sole writers or sole artists. But when it comes to motivation, I find that people in our position, let's say, it's almost like unless there's a story to tell, there's nothing to draw, so what's the point? I find that it's difficult to find motivation because I don't mean to sound crass if I say fetishization of art itself. I love paintings. I like the process of painting, but the actual act itself does not give me nearly as much pleasure or satisfaction as I told a story. And I've suspected for a long time, and I guess this is a confirmation of sorts, that you're kind of in that boat as well, maybe, is because one of the categories of questions I wanted to ask you about was specifically storytelling and your, I don't want to, again, sound like I'm kissing your butt, but like your mastery of storytelling as a craft itself. If you don't mind.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm definitely a storyteller. I love talking. I love telling stories. I love recounting stories. And I'm really terrible, and it's embarrassing to me. Although I've been told it is not. I was just told recently by someone I was mentoring, actually. I said, God, I've been rambling. I'm sorry. And they said, no, I like it when you talk. You're good with words. I like hearing your story. So I love telling stories. And I love talking. And usually I will, you ask me what time it is, I'll tell you how to build a clock. And usually I'll tell a story. You'll end up with me going, okay, I told you that story so I could tell you this one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's...
There's panels that you do at PAX of kind of a sit down with Scott kind of thing, where I've noticed.
Yeah.
I guess maybe it's subconscious if you haven't noticed that you do this, but I've noticed when you tell a story, there are certain things, like not necessarily the 3-act structure, but I'd be very surprised if you don't know that you're doing this. That I guess that just means it's instinctual, where you'll do things like, I have this written down. You'll do a setup. You'll set up red herrings, and then you'll lead to a climax, and then there'll be a cool down, and then a hook to lead to the next story. And I've noticed you do this throughout your career.
When I do an evening with Scott Kurtz?
That's one of the instances, but I would say throughout the entire time I've been listening to you tell stories on, PATV or when you were doing shows with Chris, I noticed that when you tell a story, there's always, especially red herrings, where it's like, I think you're going in one direction, but you're actually telling another story. So then you'll do like a callback, and it seems like so instinctual that, like, did he plan that? Where you set a joke up 10 minutes ago, and then you'll do the joke, and it's like, whoa, was he planning that? But it sounds like it's just an instinct, and that's really cool. But
I'm not aware that I'm doing that.
Okay, you do that. I have noticed that. I can give you examples later. But
the red herring sounds really fascinating.
No, you definitely do. I put a few bookmarks down in my notes here. But all right, so on a higher...
I can't go back and watch those
because of embarrassment.
Oh yeah, I see myself talking and I go, oh God, why did I do this?
Okay.
Yeah, I can't watch any of those. I'll start to watch. I've tried in the past to watch like an evening with Scott Kurtz because it's very intimate and it goes over so well and we have such a good time. And I feel very safe talking to those people at PAX, that audience. They know me and I know that there's always new people there because they tell me, but I know I recognize people in there that have been there since the first one I did. Mm-hmm. And we all understand that I'm going to be genuine with you for an hour. And it's going to make me feel good and it's going to make you feel good, hopefully. And I'm going to probably be more real than I should. And let's see what happens, but this is just for us. And then I saw it's on Twitch, and I'm like, well, I'll watch this because people really seem to respond well to it. And I get 3 minutes in, I go, oh, shut the fuck up, dude. Shut up. Mm-hmm. Shut up.
To the comments.
Nobody cares. No, to me, to myself.
Oh, okay.
I'm yelling at the me talking, and I go, dude, Scott.
I see.
You are not funny. This is terrible. Shut up. Oh, I can't stand it.
I've noticed this pattern. No, this is a pattern with creative people I know. I know a bunch of us types that we have such sharp teeth in order to grind our own tastes and what we consume. Like, I only consume stuff that I think doesn't suck, right? And I write essays in my own head of why I don't like something. But as soon as I turn that on myself, I'm like a mage with 1 HP. Like, my one fire spell can blow up 20 people, and then it definitely blows me up by accident. if I stand too close. So
Yeah.
I would imagine a sensitive storytelling type, like let's say we're in that circle. I would imagine watching yourself would be excruciating, only because you've spent so many years studying the craft of storytelling that you notice even the smallest little quote mistake, but meanwhile other people are loving it.
Yeah, they do love it. The last time I did it, I had 2 people approach me afterwards to ask me if I would come do it at their event, and I said, "Oh, this won't work at another event." These people know me. They've known me for years. They've followed me. This is like a penny arcade con, and I've been a part of their world for a little bit, and the people that are here know of me. But the people at your show won't, and they're like, "You're wrong. This will go over. I didn't know who you were. I came here because someone told me this was a great show. I want you to come do this at our conference."
Yeah.
And I'm like, I wouldn't even know what I would talk to your audience about. So yeah, I don't get it.
For what it's worth, I think even without knowing who you are, what you have done in your stories, that I could share the notes later. I don't want to go too long on this, but as long as there's context for each story, which there is most of the time, but then again, I know who you are, or I'm familiar with your work, let's say. When you set up, for instance, a story about your father moving in with you,
right?
You are very complete with the setup process, and then you talk about each character's personality a little bit, and then you set up the joke. And I noticed that in the setup process at the very beginning of the story, you tell things that you later reference in the story that it's like, oh, and again, it made me think that you had set it up from the beginning, but it turns out it's just instinct, I guess. But
my oldest friend, Rob, who I've known since the 5th grade, told me like a month ago, he told me that I was a natural storyteller, and that he goes, "You actively craft even stories you tell personally in your life." And I said, "No, I don't." And he's like, "Scott, I've known you for almost 40 years now. I've heard you tell your stories over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard them just once. And every time you tell it, you tighten it.
Yeah.
You remember from the last time what got a good reaction, what is superfluous, what you can do here, what you can do there, how you can make it better." And my face got all red. I was so embarrassed.
Well,
and I said, "I'll stop." And he's like, "No, you're not lying. You're not being deceitful. You're just a natural storyteller. You're distilling the story down."
Yeah, it's refinement, really.
And then we had a whole conversation about, since memories are imperfect, at what point is any memory a truthful recreation of the experience anyway? So what does it matter if you embellish? It's already an embellishment.
Well, there is a difference between, in storytelling, telling the truth and crafting the story in such a way that it goes down smooth for the listener.
Yeah.
And of course, truth is very important to you, and authenticity, I know this. But in the way that you tell a story, I think I would agree. If for what it's worth, coming from a stranger, we don't know each other that well, but I would say I've observed for sure that what you do isn't quite stand-up comedy exactly. It's more like a story time kind of thing where it is funny, can be funny.
It is definitely not stand-up.
No.
That's an art that I have not crafted.
I don't mean it exactly like you're telling jokes, but you can stand there and talk for an hour, and it's fascinating the whole time. And you'll tell jokes, and also you'll tell very moving stories at sometimes. So it's not exactly haha funny, but it's always interesting. But I think that's really fascinating as a part of, well, if I could encourage you for what it's worth, I think that's definitely worth pursuing. The refinement of a story I wanted to ask you about, even if it is instinctual, I think I've heard you talk about this on podcasts before, the science of telling a story. But first, can I ask you, is it okay if we go a little longer, or do you have something to do? I don't want to take up...
You're not taking up my time at all. This is fascinating. I really enjoy talking jobs. So.
All right. I'm grateful. I just don't want to take up too much time. Normally these go for an hour or so. But anyway, I'll just keep going. I have noticed your instincts for storytelling are, well, let me ask it like this.
Okay.
What makes a story good? What makes a story interesting? What makes a story boring to you?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot, because I'm writing it. I'm writing a story right now. That's an actual story, and it's important to me that it's a story. I have, for the longest time, written stories in an episodic nature, through a daily comic strip, and it is not a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a sitcom. I basically tell situations, and there is character development that happens over the course of weeks, months, and then as I got better, I learned you could do character development within a panel if you really want to, which never occurred to me earlier in my career. Really didn't occur to me till I saw the movie Tombstone. But
that's actually one of the examples. Could you briefly tell us that story?
There's a line in Tombstone where there is just a fucking bucket load of character development dumped on you about Doc Holliday in one line. It's towards the end of the movie, where things have come to a head between the Earps and the Cowboys, and Wyatt's hunting them all down, and Doc is at the end of his fucking rope with his tuberculosis, and they're out there, like at a camp, waiting to, they're tracking down bad guys, and Doc Holliday is laying down, coughing blood up into a handkerchief, and this other cowboy says, "What the fuck are you doing here, Doc? You should be home and in bed. Why are you out here?" And Doc Holliday says, "Wyatt Earp is my friend." And the cowboy goes, "Hell, I got lots of friends." And Doc Holliday says, "I don't."
Mm-hmm.
And that was pages of character development in one fucking line. And it's so much a great example of less is more, and such a great way of it's such a great teachable line that, like, you don't need 5 pages of exposition to explain a relationship. You can do it very subtly, and it's richer when it happens that way, because I think the people can figure it out. Audiences are much smarter than I think a lot of people give them credit for, and I think it's pretty scary and brave when an artist goes, "Well, I understand this, and I want to pull it back a little bit, and I'm not going to explain it. I'm just going to show it.
Mm-hmm.
And if people get it, they get it, and if they don't, they don't." I had someone just tweet me. Jonathan Ying tweeted at me yesterday and did this for me. He said, "I love that in the reboot of PvP, you have Francis dressed up like Cole, because that is his one example of an adult in his life that he grew up with." And I was like, oh my God, someone caught that. Like, wow, they caught it. Like, someone saw it. Like, that's so... I cannot believe that worked, that someone sees it. Maybe more people see it. Or maybe they see it and don't realize they see it. Like, so yeah. A good story, I think, has a change in the protagonist. I think for it to be a story, the person that you meet when the story starts has to be different from the person at the end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
If there's not a change, then it's not really a story. So yeah, my stuff tends to be very character driven. Like I said, up to this point, it's been very episodic. I haven't really studied story structure very much until recently.
Well, I think you have. I'm sorry.
Here's where I'm rambling again. See, I went off rambling, and I don't know that I'm answering your question or even making any fucking sense.
Well, really, the goal of any question is to basically open your mind and learn from everything that spills out. So in that case, it's very, very fascinating. Well, the initial question I would say isn't as interesting as what I want to ask next is one of the things that I've heard you say in regards to storytelling and character development is that the thing that makes a character the most interesting is not how hard you can, let's say, roll a 20 and how hard he punches an enemy and it goes down. You mentioned this with any sort of tabletop performance, let's say. You said something that the thing that makes a character most interesting is their choices.
Yeah.
I guess, are there instances in popular storytelling or in your storytelling where characters... All right, so in RPGs, there's something called power creep, where the stronger an enemy gets... Feel free, I don't want to talk over you.
No.
Tell us about power creep, and I guess I want to relate that to characterization and choices in a story.
Well, I mean, it really is a problem in episodic storytelling because, especially when you're going to be playing the game of, I'm making something, it's getting good response, let's see how long I can continue to make it. As opposed to, I have a story to tell, it has a beginning, a middle, and end, and then it's done.
Yeah.
And that's all anybody gets. I think that's where power creep and character creep can really seep in. But power creep is that your character starts at some place, the story goes and continues, and the character grows and changes over the course of the story. They learn, they improve, they become better, or maybe they become worse, you know? And then there's nowhere to go but ending the story or continuing it. And if you continue it, there's more change, and if they keep growing, right? So the apprentice becomes the adept, becomes the master, you know, and then they're a god, right? Their power grows as you go, and as it grows, they become less and less interesting, which is why I maintain to this day that The Last Jedi was a really great movie because Rian Johnson made some really fucking brave choices in that movie. And when you compare it to Rise of Skywalker, where no choices were made, you can really see the difference. And I just thought it was brilliant what he did in that movie. Having Luke toss that lightsaber over his shoulder was a really fucking brave choice. And it was interesting. And it wasn't what anyone expected was going to happen. But all Luke really said in that movie was the same thing every fan has been saying since the prequels, which is, the Jedi are kind of stupid. They really don't know what the fuck they're doing. Their code is dumb. The Sith kick their ass every fucking time. The Council crumbled. Like, they're really terrible at this. You know? And, like, the choices Luke made in that movie were really great. Like, he chose to hide out to protect his friends. He chose to disconnect from the Force so he couldn't be found. And so he wouldn't be tempted. The whole point of that movie was, if you want this conflict to end, stop fighting. Because it's just a cycle. It's going to continue and continue forever. And so he did. He stopped. He's like, look, this is hubris. I'm done. And then Rey shows up and pulls him back into it. So, but there's a great line in that movie. My favorite line of the whole new trilogy is where he's sitting with Yoda's ghost, and Yoda says to him, "This is the hardest lesson that we have to learn as teachers. Is we are the thing they move beyond. You have to accept that we're the thing that they move past. That's your role, and your role is to be left behind." And I was like, "Wow, that's so powerful." You know, and then you jump forward to Rise of Skywalker, and now everyone's so terrified to upset the fans, no choice has any fucking consequence, right? Chewie's blown up, now he's in a different ship. The 3PO gets his mind wiped, nah, R2 has a backup. Like, there's no consequence, there's no choice that's made. Everything is fixed. It's pointless. It just has no weight to it.
I noticed.
And I do think characters are more interesting because of their flaws. It's one of the reasons why I don't like any of the Dritz Duerden novels, because Dritz is a badass who never loses. You know, it never does, and it's not interesting that he never loses. Right? It's the difference between Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan.
Yes. So, a character that's too powerful who never makes any serious mistakes. I guess there's a parallel between the word you say interesting and relatable. If a character is too perfect and too powerful, then he's not relatable because all of us reading have flaws. Like Superman has never been an interesting character to me, but Batman's very interesting. Well, in this example, I would say Superman, the stereotypical Superman, is too powerful. He has no serious flaws. But I'm saying Superman versus Batman. If Batman has all these flaws, he's more human, he's more relatable. But we can shelf that example. But I would say it's interesting that you're using parallels. Like, I didn't like The Last Jedi, but I definitely respect your perspective on what happened to Luke. That is more interesting than if he was just a wise, perfect teacher that didn't really do anything in the story. I think something happened in the storytelling that I think muddled that lesson. But as far as Star Wars goes, not even Star Wars, I would say. Part of what you mentioned in storytelling as one of the key moves is the art of refinement, and I wanted to ask you about that, especially in regards to comics as well.
Okay.
So the art of refinement, I think, I don't know who said this, but I know you were there. There was one time you or someone were talking about if you're drawing a bunch of blades of grass, 2 strokes of a pen would be too few, and 4 would be too many, and 3 is just right. So there's something in the art of comics and telling a story and telling a joke that is related to the act of refinement and sort of trimming all the excess off of a story so that you're left with the most refined, like brevity is the soul of wit kind of thing.
Yeah, you want to find the right. You want to find the right balance when it comes to that. It happens a lot in dialogue. There's an economy of line and economy of words. It's gonna be a really fucking shitty name drop, but I got to talk to Jim Davis. I got to meet Jim Davis and meet him in Muncie, Indiana, and talk to him a couple years ago. And I was picking his brain about writing, and he told me that every Garfield strip is 25 words or less. He won't let a strip be over 25 words. I told him that was crazy. I thought that was too... Like, why would you do that? You know? And he's like, I just want to make sure the dialogue's tight, and I think you should be able to get it in 25 words or less. And I'm like, oh, I would not be able to do that. But that was a goal for him. You know, that was his yardstick. But yeah, so it's interesting because the comic strip is a format that its whole format is predicated on column width of a medium that no one's creating the content for anymore. The reason why a comic strip is 4 panels and it's a strip is because it has to fit within half a column, or it has to fit in a column width of a newspaper. And the reason why the art has to be simplified and the dialogue has to be short is because you need to make the art clear enough to see when it's reduced down in size, and the text has to be readable, so the text has to be big, and you can't fit a lot of text into that panel because half of it is art. So the whole conceit of the comic strip exists because of the restrictions of the format of the medium at which no one's using anymore. But none of us really abandoned it. Because I'm on the web and I can make my strip as many panels as I want. I can make the panels as big as I want. But I still want to do a strip. And I've thought about this a lot. And it's because I just think that it was a happy accident of those constraints made a really wonderful consumable bite of content, and I think it works really well on the web. So yeah, isn't that weird?
No, I think it's almost as if as if I had anything to do with it, comics in general have discovered that in stand-up comedy as a storytelling platform, there's a certain something's been discovered by accident almost because of the format itself, that even a kid can understand a comic even if they don't know how to read. And there's something I've been speculating about comics as zip files, where they're sort of hyper compressed, like there are these giant, how do I put it, only in a few panels you can tell enormous stories. Even through a few, move the camera just an inch to the side and something completely different happens. And there's something that happens in the reader's mind when that data is decompressed and interpreted, where there's something amazing about comics that even a kid can do it. And maybe there's some kind of like psychological, going back thousands or whoever knows how many years in our brains, where it's like, I see a thing and then I see another thing next to it and I fill in the blanks, and all of a sudden there's an eruption of meaning.
Yeah.
I don't know how to formulate that into a question exactly, but it's part of the discipline of comics. Is that something you consciously do?
It's something I've worked on for a long time, and I do think in 4 panels. I do break things up into 4 panels. I do it all the time. When something funny happens in my life, and I think that would be good for the strip, I start working it into 4 panels. Whether it's a moment or a joke.
In manga, they have a 4-panel setup structure where it's setup, tension, climax, resolution. And they have their 4 panels, like it's their tradition or something.
Hold on one second.
Sure.
I'm doing a little podcast interview. Do you still want to go do that thing today? Okay. No, obviously, but you want to do it today or tomorrow? All right, we'll figure it out. Okay. Sorry.
That's all right.
Setup, tension. What was it again?
Setup, tension, climax, resolution.
Okay.
So when you read a 4-panel strip in Japan, they actively try to do that with instead of a 3-act structure, there's a 4th step. But I noticed, like, let's say there are 3-panel comic strips on one hand, and then there's the 4-panel strip on the other. And I love 4-panel personally, but it's almost like writing music in a different meter. There's different steps.
Definitely.
I don't know. I guess once again, I don't know how to formulate that into a question. It's something I have noticed that you do it, especially when you tell your stories on stage, for instance. A couple more questions is the nature of marketing and virality for a comic strip. It's something I've been experimenting with and trying to learn about. Do you have any theories on what makes something go viral? A comic strip specifically.
Not go viral, but I don't really have a theory on what makes a comic really resonate with people, I've always been off about that. I do know that it's nothing that I can plan to happen. I mean, unless I'm pushing a button, right? And then it's a very specific reaction. It's like saying, well, if I punch him in the nose, I'll get a reaction, you know? And I don't like doing that. I found that the most surefire way to get a good reaction to a strip is to share something and be as genuine in the telling of the joke as I can, or the message as I can. But I will do throwaway gags because I'm out of ideas and think, well, this is going to be a shit day. I have no idea. I'm going to do this. And it's just like, I need an idea. Please, anything. Someone give me an idea. And then someone throws out something silly and I'm like, great, I'm going to do it. And then I put it up and then people lose their minds over it. The panda attack in PvP, that gag started because I needed something, and my brother and I had watched a Fox special called When Animals Attack. And a panda was pulling a guy through the bars of a zoo. And we were laughing so hard because you don't think pandas are mean or aggressive. But it was like ripping the guy up. And Brian's like, do a panda attack for tomorrow's strip. And I'm like, okay, I'll just have a panda show up and rip him to shreds. Oh, people lost their minds. And he became a recurring gag on the strip for years. Same for the cat. Same for Scratch Fury. I had a throwaway gag where Brent was a very bah humbug guy for many years, and he had a contest one year where he said if anyone could make him feel the Christmas spirit, he would buy him something really expensive. And Francis brought him a stray cat. It's like, oh, this cat, this poor Christmas stray needs a home. And Brent's like, I hate cats and I'm allergic. And then it scratched the shit out of him. And he's like, get it out of here. And people were like, what happened to the cat? I want more cat. What happened to that little cat? And so I had a friend at the time who used to work in newspapers, and he said, yeah, you never introduce a dog or a cat to your comic strip because you'll get letters if you don't show them again. People want dogs or cats in strips. That's why Snoopy and Garfield do so well. So that's what. Then I just kept. I had Skull take the cat, so people would shut up about what happened to the cat, and then people were like, "Hey, what's going on with Skull's cat?" And then that's how Scratch Fury came to be. Was because I just literally could not get people to shut up about what's going on with the cat. So I don't know what is going to make an idea or a concept stick in the heads of the readership. It's completely random as far as I can tell.
Part of that extends to a question of do you write for yourself or the audience, or a combination of both of those?
I write for me. I mean, I've done fan service in the past, and I know that, and I have learned how to do fan service without it just being trite. But I always write for me. I write stuff that makes me laugh. And then the audience, that's what I mean, that's another reason why I was saying before, is that if you write something that's genuine to you and it's important to you and it's just 100% honest, to the point where it's a little scary, then people will respond to that. People will 100% respond to that. And I think that's where you should try to always get. I did a whole series of strips about anxiety. And I had Cole's anxiety represented by a version of him that was like blue-skinned. Like this little, you know the girl in the Willy Wonka movie that eats the blue thing and she turns blue? He looked like that.
Yeah.
Just this kind of like ghost sitting behind him in the chair whispering like, nobody likes you, you know, this is going to fail. And I talked about anxiety and had him get on medicine and stuff, and people, I mean, the reaction to that was just me just talking about my anxiety. and how it sits behind you and tries to wreck you. And the response to that was huge. Just crazy huge. People are like, "Thank you so much for talking about that. It's so important." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, well, you're welcome." I just wanted, I was a little afraid to write about it because, I did another strip about my dad too, that really went over. And I drew. It was basically my dad. The first time my dad, when he was living with us, I found him in the bathroom and he had crapped his pants.
Mhm.
He was trying to hide it. I'm like, "What's going on?" He's like, I didn't make it." And I'm like, "Oh, that's okay. Come get me. Why would you not come get me?" He's like, "Well, it's not your problem." I'm like, "Papa, here, give me this. Let's get in the shower. Let's do this, And I drew that experience. There was no punchline. I just drew it. And I drew me as Skull. And that hit people like a ton of bricks. Like the reaction to that strip was crazy. And that's when I learned that there are so many people, there are millions, probably billions of dollars worth of unpaid caregivers in this country. People that are doing what would amount to $1 billion industry of caregiving for free, taking care of their folks. And they're all experiencing it and no one talks about it. Mm-hmm. Because people came out of the woodwork to tell me I am going through or have gone through this with my parents or grandparents. Like just so many people that are experiencing the same thing. It's universal and no one talks about it. And they were just so thrilled that I talked about it. And a lot of people want me to do a lot of strips about that. And I just don't feel right doing it right now. My dad's in a weird place where he's gone and here at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's this very odd, ambiguous loss. But I did that strip, and man, it struck a chord. Yeah. So I mean, it's stuff like that, and you can't predict it. I don't know how anything. I think someone told me one time that trying to go viral is like someone standing outside with a tinfoil hat hoping lightning will strike them.
That's an interesting way to put it.
It's not going to happen.
I guess there's a parallel also, and I'll wrap up soon. I'm so sorry for keeping you for so long.
You're not. It's fine.
There was... If I was to put all of this under an umbrella, everything we've talked about the whole time so far, it's... well, there's this joke of hashtag relatable, where I have a buddy, Shenaniganson, who his strips are always, everyone's like, "Oh, hashtag relatable." I don't know if it annoys him or something, but I suppose one of the things that you just mentioned with your story with your father, and you've told a lot of stories about that. I encourage anyone to look those up. No, but those are really interesting stories, and I don't mean that in a patronizing way, of course. They're really interesting and relatable stories. Part of, I guess, what moves people is that they do, there's that quote by Thoreau of many people live lives of silent desperation and things that they can't or won't talk about with others openly. One of the things that storytelling and comics share, and one of the beautiful things of this craft that are unique to our profession, let's say, is that you can tell stories from the heart. And it's such a private and beautiful and meaningful thing that can happen between you and the reader using the medium of a comic, for instance, or in your case, maybe even telling a story on a stage. There's something that happens, like there's a connection of sorts between the listener and the creator, let's say. That maybe that's the soul of virality. This thing speaks, this little package of this JPEG says everything about everything that I've possibly thought of this one topic. It's this little zip file that, hey, let me share it. And then all of a sudden 1 million people have read it and say, wow, this speaks for me. But that does relate to why I think your stories, not just your comics, but again, with even telling a story on a stage or on a podcast, one of the things that makes you so magnetic is the ability to open your heart and connect to the listener. And I think that's actually a very rare talent, where a lot of people are guarded, but almost to a fault. I don't mean that in a negative way, where a lot of times where I guess, for instance, you specifically get into fights with people, let's say, online. And I've noticed that it's because you can't not open your heart up. And that's fascinating to me.
I don't do that anymore.
No, but I mean this as a compliment.
Yeah, I know. It's got to mean to. I think the jury's still out on whether that has been a net positive for me or not. And I try not to do it anymore. For a couple of reasons, but
interpersonally, I totally like. Relationships are a completely different thing, but as far as the craft of storytelling goes, like that's a very strong tool in a tool belt. So I hope you wouldn't put that tool away when it comes to storytelling.
I mean, yeah. What, being able to get into a fight with somebody?
No. I don't mean wearing your heart on your sleeve like it's a bad thing, but being so...
Oh, that stuff. Yeah,
so
no, that's
open.
That's never been a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a problem that I have right now that I've gotten literal counseling over, is that I don't mind being an open book. I mean, I always say I'm the Del Griffith of comics. You know, what you see is what you get. There's not a lot hidden about me. I don't have a problem opening up, and I don't have a problem sharing. My problem is that I'll meet someone and like them and get excited about meeting them, and then go, well, we're best friends now. Mm-hmm. You know, whatever you need, just give me a call. And when that isn't reciprocated, because how could it be? Because you don't just become best friends with somebody when you meet them. Then my feelings get hurt, and I feel betrayed. Mm-hmm. And I had a friend who told me, you're doing this, I know because I do it, and I've had to work not to. You don't have to let everybody in so completely immediately. Like, it's okay to keep some distance. It's okay to say, I like you, I've enjoyed hanging out with you, that's where it ends today. You don't have to then invite them into your house and then, you know, give them a key, and like, it's okay to let that happen progressively. Mm-hmm. But like, especially with the evening at Scott Kurtz, or when I talk to people publicly, I don't care. I will just be honest and say what I want to say, and I think I have the freedom to do that because I have made my own way professionally. I have the luxury of not representing a publisher. So if I was working with Marvel or DC, or, you know, if I had a Netflix show or something and I was being interviewed for it, I have to, you know, if I worked for Wizards of the Coast, right, instead of making an independent comic about D&D, I couldn't just go up and say, I don't like Twitch. I don't like the way they handle these kids, these influencers. You know, I can't say that because I also represent a company. Yeah. But the company I represent is me right now. I'm representing my brand. So I have the luxury of being able to go on stage at a PAX, and when the guy says, please don't curse, by the way, on this Twitch stream, I can look at the guy and go, who are you? He's like, well, I'm with Twitch. I'm like, fuck you. Of course I'm going to curse. You don't want to offend anyone's sensibilities? Why don't you guys start worrying about these Twitch partner kids you have? You know, you guys let these kids stream video games 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until they burn themselves out. You give them more money than Elvis at 16 years of age. And then when they say the N-word or drive their car into oncoming traffic, you cut them loose because there's 10 more. and you're going to tell me you're offended by me saying fuck, shove it up your ass.
Yeah.
You know, and I can say that because it will only benefit me because people say, I like that guy speaking his mind, and I don't have to represent. I'm not having to worry about it being misconstrued as my words representing someone else's words.
Yeah.
But I think, honestly, I think the jury's still out about whether or not that is a good way to go about things.
All right, so there's a pro and a con there, and I swear I won't keep dragging this out.
Yeah, sure, there is.
I mean, I would say I don't value people who bite their tongue because they're a part of a machine. I don't consume anything they create. I want to consume things that are from the heart and real and meaningful, and I don't consume products that feel marketed or something like that, artificial.
No, I get that, and I think that there is. I think that there is value to what I do when it comes to that stuff, but I think that there's also, whether you like it or not, there is a politics involved to certain things, and you need to be an adult about it and think about it, right? So. And I need to be conscious of it too, because if you get just wrapped up in, well, I'm gonna lay into Twitch right now, and I'm gonna have this audience by the balls. Then later, I'm gonna be in a room with an executive from Twitch. I'm gonna want something from him, and he's gonna say, "Go fuck yourself."
Yeah.
So then Corey can look at me and go, "Well, you're probably really proud. Congratulations, you did it. You really stuck it to Twitch." So, you got to think about that stuff. And the only reason I say that is because people are listening to this, and I don't want some kid to go, well, I'm just going to do that too. It's worked for Scott. There's a reason why Howard Stern has done as well as he's done for so long, and it's because he doesn't say the N-word. He gets someone else to come on his show and say it, and then he gets to go, you're crazy. Mm-hmm. It's wrong to say the N-word. But the truth is, Howard Stern had the N-word on his show, and that was his goal. Howard Stern gets strippers on and says, this is nuts, I can't believe these strippers are here. Yeah, but I'm a married man. Like, he's careful about it,
I see.
I mean, at least it used to be that way. Now in the Trump era, nothing makes sense anymore. Everything is its own satire now, so. Mm. But,
I noticed that there's a certain, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess that's the indie spirit. Is what I'm trying to say. I've noticed that, throughout the time that I've known and followed your career, there's a certain rock star indie thing going on. At the same time, I've also seen the ups and downs and risks and rewards of that. I don't mean to patronize, but I think it's endlessly fascinating and admirable to see so many highs and lows embodied in one person's career. I think it's really, obviously there's still many years, so who knows what's going to happen, but I'm fascinated watching and learning from all of your experiences. It's unless there was something else you wanted to say, I do want to ask one more question in relation
sure.
to this. If you could share some wisdom of where do you think comics are and where do you think they're going, and how can we position ourselves in such a way, what would your advice be to?
God, I don't know where comics are going right now. I'm in a really weird spot right now, and I don't have an answer to that question. I've spent the last 3 years dealing with a family crisis with my dad, because he went from living independently to having to come live with us to having to move into a group home and being cared for 24/7. And it ate up so much time that I really lifted my head up from the drawing board and from the world of comics, and I didn't really get back to it until this last week. I mean, seriously, about a week and a half ago. So, and I sat down to figure out what I had to do to reinvent myself, my career, and the comic strip so I could move forward and get momentum going again. And you can't take your eye off the ball for a year or two in any industry that involves tech and not lose your path. And not to mention the fact that then the pandemic hit. And so I don't know what publishing even looks like in the next 5 to 10 years. I don't know what kind of an impact COVID's going to have. I know that, Marvel and DC basically shut down production for a little bit. I know they're coming back limitedly. IDW's looking to sell their company. I don't know what publishing comics is going to look like in the next year. I don't know what conventions are going to look like in the next 5 years. Because I don't think anyone can really safely have a comic book convention until 2022. And who's going to be able to stay on that long, right? So I think the whole landscape of comics is going to change. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can tell you what I hope happens. What I really, really hope happens, and I don't think it will, but what I go to bed at night and pray to the God I don't believe into about comics is that we as a society in America can culturally change the way that we look at comics and what they are. Because right now, I feel like as Americans, we have a very myopic view about what comics are compared to Japan or Europe. It's so myopic. And, I always joke that if, I was at a bar doodling, and some Texas oil man came up and said, "Yeehaw, I love your comic strips, and I'm going to give you $3 million to buy a Super Bowl ad because I want you to promote this comic." I would not know what to put in the Super Bowl ad if I made a comic book. What would the fuck would the ad say? "Hi, I'm Scott Kurtz, and this is my comic. And this is my Super Bowl ad, and I want you to tell you to go buy my comic. Please buy my comic at a shop that may or may not exist near where you live, and if it does exist, you really don't want to go in there anyway because it's a piece of shit store." How do you tell anyone where to go? You can't say available at all booksellers and newsstands anymore when it comes to a comic.
True.
And that's just crazy to me. So I hope that the pandemic kills the direct market. I hope it kills this myopic world of what print comics mean for America. This whole idea of a comic book retailer is where you go to buy comics. We should be able to buy comics anywhere that you buy books. You should be able to buy comics in the grocery stores. You should be able to buy comics at a Walmart and a Target and Costco. They should be everywhere. And in Japan, they have those Shonen Jump books.
Anthologies.
Where, you don't just buy... in Japan, you don't buy your favorite manga in a floppy book every month. Every manga series gets, 10 to 30 pages in the Shonen Jump for the month? Is it monthly or weekly, the Shonen books?
There's different types, but Shonen Jump is weekly, actually.
So wait, okay, so Shonen Jump is one book, specific brand of book, right? One title.
It's a magazine, like a collection of artists. Yeah.
Okay, so what is that type of book called there?
Well, a tankobon is the collection, the volumes that you might find at a Barnes and Noble.
Right,
But
I just ordered the first 3 volumes of Bakuman.
Yes.
But not every artist gets one of those.
No, that would... I would think most of them do. What we call anthology in English, I'm not sure what the Japanese word is. Shonen Jump, the magazine, is a newsprint, black and white book. It's very cheaply printed. It's on the magazine rack. It's not in the bookstores proper. So it would take an 18-page-ish story of, say, Bakuman or Berserk or whatever, and they're collected by theme and demographic. So Shonen Jump is just for teenage boys and younger, but other people can read it too. It's an 18-page chapter, and each artist contributes a chapter every week. And then when enough chapters are collected, they're collected into books, aka what you would find at a volume as a volume.
Right. Yeah, I wish we would do that here. I really do.
Yeah, a lot of us have been sort of playing with and flirting with the idea. That's a huge
I don't.
question.
Well, I don't think we have the quality and consistency here. We don't have the work ethic here like they do.
Well, they also, to be fair, Japanese artists work with like 5 assistants to produce that kind
Right.
of speed of work.
They do, and we don't. But we also don't have the system by which artists could do that. Like, that's my big question: is how do you start? How do you become a mangaka? You start as an assistant for someone, right?
In Japan, most likely, or you would enter a contest, and then an editor would contact you afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah. They have that going on in Japan almost every month, I would say. Every so often, every few months, they have these contests. I actually won one, but it wasn't for a book deal or anything. It was just an international manga thing. But they do these talent searches, and in America, I think they don't do talent searches. Tokyopop did briefly. That's how I got my debut, and then they went out of business. But I think...
Yeah, I heard those were pretty notoriously bad.
Yeah, I guess because American manga artists were still sort of... They weren't allowing themselves to be American. They were trying to emulate Japan, and there was a whole can of worms there. But I think we are poised. The talent is there, but the infrastructure has too many problems right now. But I would say, on the topic of the future, perhaps, for indie creators, there's 2 options at least. I have noticed that crowdfunding through things like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, that sort of thing, for, let's say, a collection of 100-page book or something like that. We've been seeing that with varied success.
Okay.
That is an option for sure.
Yeah, like what Trotman does, right? Like,
I mean, there's a whole bunch of artists that
she does a lot of that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, with varied success. I can't even say, like, even Abby Howard, she was the first instance that I noticed was the biggest one. I don't remember how much she made for the last Halloween. It was like $90K, right?
I don't remember.
I recall after Strip Search, because she had won 3rd place or something like that, and then she did a Kickstarter or something like that and just exploded and made all this money to do the last Halloween. I was like, wow, you can make so much money. And that was only the beginning. But I think that is relative to audience size and passion. And then as a supplement to that, I think Patreon's also a huge opportunity. You mentioned that you were starting one, or you have started one.
Well, I've had 2 Patreons for a couple of years now, one for PvP and one for Table Titans, but like I said, over the last couple of years, I have not really done anything, so they've all gone stagnant. I have revived them both within the last month. The Table Titans one is chronicling a YA graphic novel I'm working on now, so the next Table Titan story I do is actually about how these kids met in junior high and became friends. So it's more of a young adult version of Table Titans, and I'm drawing it and writing it now. And that Patreon is mostly behind the scenes of the production of that book, and then also any game content we make that's based off of Table Titans. So like modules, adventures, monsters, new classes, and stuff for playing D&D we put in there. The PvP Patreon is very different because PvP readers have been around for a long time. They've bought multiple things from me. They don't want new stuff. They just want to support the strip. So you can pay to have the ads removed from the website, or get the strip bigger, or get the strip emailed to you. It's really not a lot of bonus content. The people that read PvP that want to back a Patreon, they mostly just want to say thank you, or just they know they're blocking ads. They don't need another book or a T-shirt, but they want to compensate me for the entertainment. So it's a different audience between PvP and Table Titans, and how they look at the work. It's kind of interesting.
I remember a story of you saying that someone just at a convention walked up to you and gave you some money for nothing, and you felt bad that you didn't want to accept it.
Yeah, that's why we started putting up the Patreon. We had one convention where more than one person walked up and just handed me a 20. And I'm like, what do you, I'm sorry, what is it that you want? He's like, no, I just want to give that to you. And I'm like, well, let me draw you something. And he goes, no, you already did. I've been reading for 20 years.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm like, I can't just take $20. He's like, you didn't just take $20. You gave me years and years and years of free content.
Mm-hmm.
I am now compensating you for it. Accept the $20. I was
Yeah.
like, okay.
Yeah, it's like a tip.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's when I was like, maybe we should just put up a Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, I think we should. The longest time I didn't think I could put up a Patreon.
I would think webcomics or comics in general are perfect for Patreon. And then when it comes to selling...
Well, no, they are, but I felt like it wouldn't be appropriate for me to put one up. Because I've had a lot of success that other cartoonists don't get to experience, and now I'm gonna ask for more money for it. You know, like I make good money on ads when a lot of people are and Corey was like, my business guy was like, shut the fuck up and put up a page.
There's no shame in it at all.
This is imposter syndrome at work.
It's the same feeling you said you get when you listen to yourself on stage. I think you're the only...
Yeah.
You're actually the only person who would judge you for that. And then there's the occasional troll, but who cares what they think?
Well, yeah. They're just looking for a dig.
Well, they can't get it unless we give it to them, I suppose. But there's one... All right. So finally, I want to ask you about avenues for self-publishing. I'll let you go, I swear, right after this. But
Okay.
Have you or will you look into... Do you think there's meat there to... selling your own books, publishing your own books again?
Yeah, absolutely. That's better than it's ever been.
Mm-hmm.
With Patreon and Kickstarter and Indiegogo, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely publish your own stuff. Put it online, get an audience. Be careful about crowdfunding.
Well, of course,
There's
the creator's
yeah.
reputation is very important as well.
Well, and you have to be careful, right? Like, the way to fail at a Kickstarter is not for it to not fund. The way to fail at a Kickstarter is for it to succeed, and you didn't plan it properly, and now you have to deliver something, and you don't have the money or the means to do it. You know, there's a lot that goes into it. You have to. It's not just putting it up and getting money to come in for it. You've got to figure out how much taxes will come out, how much shipping is going to cost, how you're going to ship the stuff out. You know, there's just a lot to it. But that being said, I mean, if you know ahead of time this is going to be work, because it is work, then yeah, I think it's a great way to go, especially now with the fate of publishers being up in the air because of the pandemic.
Yeah. Well, publishers,
more than ever.
They've never really been nice to us as far as I'm concerned, so that's fewer middlemen to give money to. I'm a jerk by saying that.
Yeah, well, it's not their job to be nice to us. It's their job to
make money.
Make money, you know.
Oh,
so,
well, what I mean is, as content creators, the most important thing that matters to me is good content, and the power's in our hands. So
yes, absolutely.
For anyone listening now, how can we follow your work? How can we support you? I want to make sure all these links will be in the description, but what's the best way we can support you and follow you?
Visit pvponline.com 5 days a week, and read the strip there. You should also follow me on Twitter, because I do view my Twitter account as a way of communicating exclusively with the people who read my content. So I'm at pvponline on Twitter. Definitely check that out. My other comic, Table Titans, is at tabletitans.com. That comes out less frequently because it's a long-form comic and it takes longer to produce. But that's pretty much where you can find me these days.
Okay. All right, I'll do some more research. I'll make sure by the time this goes up, everyone, there will be links down below. But yeah, man, we almost did 2 hours. I'm so sorry for going over time, but this has been...
Oh, no, that's great.
This is an incredible conversation. It's such a treat to talk to someone whose work I've been following for so long.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. That's very, very kind.
And thanks, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Thank you for coming, Scott.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.